Luma was born with a spark in her eyes that no shadow could dim. Even as a baby, she would smile at birds through the cracks in the roof or laugh when the wind danced past her cheeks. But in the compound where she lived, such light was dangerous. Mama Duru, the mistress of the house, ruled with a silent iron. Her eyes were always narrowed, her lips forever pressed in a line too tight to be kissed by warmth. In her home, silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. A smile was a crime, a laugh a rebellion. And Luma, no matter how much she tried to suppress it, carried sunshine in her bones. From the moment she could walk, Luma knew she was different. Other children kept their heads down, their mouths tight. They watched her warily, as if her happiness might infect them and bring punishment with it. And it often did. The first time Mama Duru saw Luma smile, she slapped her so hard her ears rang for hours. "There is nothing here to smile about," the woman hissed. Luma, nursing a swollen cheek, had looked up at the cracked ceiling and whispered, "But the light still comes through." That defiance earned her 3 days with no food, and still, when she saw the kitchen boy drop a spoon and yelp in surprise, a giggle escaped her. The other servants whispered about her behind her back. Some pitied her, others avoided her. Most resented her. Why did she keep smiling? Didn't she understand that the walls of this house swallowed joy like a beast starving for sorrow? But Luma could not explain the smile that lived inside her. It came when she saw birds hopping on the roof, or when the wind fluttered the curtains like ghostly dancers. It appeared when a drop of rain hit her hand just right, cold and sudden and alive. She hid her smiles behind her hands, or turned her face away when she felt one rise. Yet somehow Mama Duru always saw. And each time another slap. Another bruise. Another punishment. The house was full of shadows. Every wall carried stories of pain, every corner held the memory of someone who had dared too much. Luma didn't know who her parents were, only that she had always lived here, among cracked tiles and hard labor. The elder maids claimed she was found on the doorstep one stormy night, a baby wrapped in a blanket of gold-threaded cloth, too fine for this place. Some said she was the daughter of a wandering healer, others whispered she was a curse left by the river spirits. Mama Duru never said a word about it, just scowled every time Luma's face lit up. And yet Luma didn't stop. At night, when everyone else had gone to sleep, she would sit by the broken mirror in the attic. A mirror no one used anymore because it was said to be cursed. Its surface was warped, cracked down the middle like a scar. But when Luma looked into it, she saw herself differently. Not just the bruises on her face or the weariness in her eyes, but the flame behind them. She would smile just a little, and sometimes she thought the mirror smiled back. Sometimes she even imagined she saw a gentler face watching her through the glass, one with kind eyes, filled with sorrow but also with love. She didn't tell anyone. Not even the kind old servant, Kina, who sometimes slipped her extra bread. The mirror was her secret, her only friend in a world that punished joy. She began to talk to it quietly. Whispers of her day, the things that made her want to smile, even when she shouldn't. And each time she smiled into that mirror, something strange happened. Her heart grew lighter, like the weight of the house couldn't fully press her down. Still, the punishments continued. Mama Duru's sharp eyes missed nothing. One morning, after catching Luma smiling at a spider spinning a web in the kitchen window, she struck her so hard Luma fell to the ground. "Smile again," she spat, "and I'll cut the corners of your mouth so wide you'll never stop." The other servants watched in silence, not daring to help. Luma clutched her side and forced herself not to cry. But later that night, in the attic, she looked in the mirror and allowed the smallest smile to bloom. "You're still here," she whispered to her reflection. "So I'll still smile." It was a quiet defiance, but it carried the strength of mountains. No matter how often she was slapped, scolded, or starved, Luma smiled. Not because she wasn't afraid, she was. Not because she enjoyed pain, she didn't. But because she knew that if she stopped smiling, if she let Mama Duru steal the last spark inside her, she would become just another ghost wandering the halls of a house already filled with them. And so she smiled. At the breeze. At the rain. At the rustling leaves and the sunlight filtered through grime-stained windows. Even when it hurt. Even when no one else could understand why. The house didn't know it yet, but something was beginning to change. A smile is a small thing. But in the right hands it can crack stone. The attic was a place where time gathered dust. Forgotten trunks, splintered furniture, and faded portraits leaned together like relics of a memory no one cared to remember. The air was thick with silence and cobwebs. It was where Mama Duru sent the servants she wanted to disappear for a while, out of sight, out of mind. And that's where Luma found herself one gray afternoon, broom in hand, her fingers raw from scrubbing the stone steps outside. She climbed the creaking ladder into the attic, dust billowing with each step. The room seemed bigger than the house itself, swallowed in shadows and lit only by streaks of sunlight that pierced through the wooden slats. As she swept, the broom struck something hard under a moth-eaten cloth. She paused. The shape beneath was tall and rectangular. Curious, she pulled the cloth away and gasped. It was a mirror. Not a simple one but grand, twice her height, with a frame carved from a dark, almost black wood. Strange symbols ran along the edges, curling like vines or smoke. But what made her heart thud was the layer of heavy fabric still veiling the glass itself. Several worn parchments were nailed into the wood with words scrawled in crimson ink. Do not uncover. Do not look. Do not touch. Cursed. Luma's hands trembled as she reached for one of the warnings. It fluttered to the floor, its brittle edges cracking like dead leaves. Behind her, a gust of wind swept through the attic, even though there were no windows open. It whispered, or maybe it sighed. She glanced behind to make sure she was alone. Then she whispered, why would they fear a mirror? The other servants had told stories. About the upstairs mirror that saw too much. About how Mama Duru had once screamed at her own reflection and covered every looking glass in the house. Some said she'd seen something that broke her. Others said the mirror had once shown her who she used to be, and what she had become. Luma hesitated. There was a warmth now in the air, gentle and almost comforting, like the arms of someone long gone. She thought she smelled lavender and smoke, memories of a better time though she couldn't recall when. Carefully, almost reverently, she peeled away the veil. At first nothing happened. Her own face blinked back at her, dusty and thin, lips chapped, hair untamed. But her eyes still carried the flicker of that unshakable smile. She touched the mirror's surface. It was warm, not cold like glass should be. And then it shifted. She didn't move, but her reflection did. Luma's breath caught in her throat as the girl in the mirror tilted her head, slightly to the right, and smiled, wide, bold, beautiful. It was her and yet not her. The reflection wore a version of her joy unafraid of consequence. The mirror flickered again, and behind the reflection, Luma glimpsed something impossible. Another room. Sunlight poured through windows that didn't exist in the real attic. Flowers bloomed in vases. A gentle hum filled the air like a lullaby. She pulled back, heart pounding. Her knees wobbled beneath her, but the mirror stayed clear, bright, defiant of the dust and gloom around it. She felt her smile tugging at her lips again. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. The mirror was not cursed, it was hidden. Like her joy. That night, Luma couldn't sleep. Her thoughts swirled with questions. Why had Mama Duru covered the mirror? What had she seen that made her seal it away? Why did the servants obey her fear without question? And why did Luma feel, for the first time in years, that she wasn't entirely alone? The next day she returned to the attic. This time with a cloth and a small cup of water. She cleaned the mirror's surface carefully, lovingly, as though waking up a sleeping friend. The symbols on the frame pulsed faintly in the shadows, glowing like quiet embers when her hand passed over them. The mirror showed her the reflection of the room again, but it shifted slightly each time she blinked, revealing small details. A child's laugh echoing in a garden, a table set for a feast, footsteps dancing in joy. The forbidden mirror didn't only reflect, it remembered. Luma leaned closer and whispered, "Did you know my mother?" A silly question. But the moment she spoke, the mirror shimmered and clouded. Her reflection faded, replaced by a blurry vision of a woman, soft eyes, a warm smile, the same shaped chin. Tears burned at Luma's eyes. She reached forward, but the image dissolved. A crack of wood downstairs reminded her of the time. She rushed to cover the mirror again, the veil now feeling like a betrayal. She didn't want to hide it anymore. But for now she had to protect it, as it was clearly protecting something inside her too. That evening, while scrubbing the hallway floor, one of the other girls hissed at her, "You were in the attic too long. Mama Duru said never to look at that glass." Luma didn't answer. But when she looked down at the bucket, her own reflection in the water smiled. This time she didn't stop it. And the water trembled, ever so slightly, as if the mirror's magic was stirring through more than just one surface now. Luma waited until the house had curled into its nightly silence, that moment just after the last footsteps faded, when even the rats hesitated in the walls. She slipped from her mat, feet bare on the cool, cracked tiles, and tiptoed up the creaking attic stairs. Her heart pounded louder with each step, not from fear, but from the strange, inexplicable pull that had not left her since she first uncovered the mirror. The veil was still there, heavy and black like mourning cloth, draped over the tall frame that stood taller than any man. Its edges curled in the shadows like it breathed. As she stood before it now, she hesitated, fingers hovering. The servant's whispers from earlier echoed in her mind. Cursed, cursed, don't look too long, it reflects more than faces, it reflects what you bury. But Luma had already seen enough sorrow in life to know when something called to her. She grasped the edge of the cloth and slowly peeled it away. The glass shimmered in the dim light of the attic's single cracked window. Dust spiraled in the moonbeams. At first glance, it was an ordinary mirror, though taller than her and etched in carvings of vines and flowers long faded by time. She saw herself, small, barefoot, wrapped in hand-sewn rags, her dark curls messy, her eyes wide with something soft but untamed. And then, she smiled. She didn't mean to. It just bloomed, tender and true, uninvited like a songbird at dusk. And that was when it happened. Another smile appeared, just behind hers. Not reflected from her own lips. This smile belonged to someone else. A second face, faint as mist, emerged in the mirror's background. Not fully formed, not yet whole, but smiling in perfect harmony with her. It was a woman's face, delicate and kind, as though woven from memory and magic. Her eyes mirrored Luma's exactly, and her smile held the same quiet rebellion. Luma gasped and took a step back, knocking into a dusty chair. The attic air grew cold, crisp like morning fog rolling in over wet earth. She stared, breath caught in her throat, but the second face had already faded, swallowed by the silver surface. Yet Luma knew what she saw. That smile. That warmth. It had smiled with her. A soft whisper curled through the air like smoke. Don't stop smiling. It wasn't her voice. She spun around. Nothing but shadows and old trunks. No wind. No footsteps. Nothing but the echo of that whisper still curling in her ears like silk thread. From that night on, the house changed. It began small. Flowers, wilted for months in dusty vases, bloomed overnight with no water. The cracked hallway mirror, long blackened with grime, reflected light even when the candles were unlit. A chill often followed Luma down the corridors, brushing her skin like a gentle hand. And every time she passed another mirror, no matter how faded, it flickered. The servants noticed. The cook burned 3 loaves of bread in a row, claiming she'd seen her dead sister's eyes in the basin water. One of the young maids cried out when her shadow moved before her feet did. They whispered about spirits, old magic, and cursed blood. And always they eyed Luma with growing suspicion. But Luma wasn't afraid. If anything, she felt watched over. Each night she returned to the attic. Each night she smiled. And each night the woman in the mirror became clearer. Not entirely solid, not yet speaking, but more real with every smile Luma offered. Her eyes sparkled like warm coals, and her lips curved in that same knowing way, as though they shared a secret no one else could grasp. One night, Luma traced her fingers over the glass. It didn't chill her. It hummed under her touch, soft like a heartbeat. She began to smile deliberately now, even during the day. Quiet, subtle things, curled lips while sweeping the floor, secret grins while stirring the pot. Her punishments from Mama Duru came harsher. The slaps grew sharper. The ridicule louder. What do you have to smile about, girl? Mama Duru had spat once, clutching her switch. Do you enjoy pain? Luma didn't answer. She had learned that sometimes silence was the loudest rebellion. Because now, every time pain tried to steal her smile, the mirror responded. The attic groaned at night, louder than the rats or the wind. Sometimes the old staircase creaked without footsteps. One morning Mama Duru's favorite porcelain figurine shattered, though no one had touched it. Another day the silver comb she prized vanished, only to appear half buried in the garden soil with rusted teeth. It was as if the house had started to watch Mama Duru back. And in her dreams, Luma began to hear laughter, not hers, not cruel, but deep, melodic, and somehow familiar. She would wake with its echo in her bones, like the last note of a lullaby she didn't remember learning. The other servants avoided her now. Some crossed themselves when she passed. But she didn't care. Something deep inside her had awakened, a sense that smiling was not weakness, not defiance, but power. Power that had been buried. Power that the mirror somehow helped her remember. Then one night as she gazed into the mirror and smiled again, the woman finally moved. Her lips parted. And she whispered, clear this time, asterisk, you found me. Asterisk. Luma's knees weakened. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't understand why, but something in her heart answered, I've been looking for you. Behind her, the attic door creaked slowly open, though no wind stirred. The smile inside the mirror only deepened. And so did Luma's. The cold slap landed hard on Luma's cheek, snapping her head to the side. Her smile faltered for a second, but her eyes didn't dim. The morning chores had just begun. She had been scrubbing the stone floor of the hallway, her knees bruised and her fingers raw, when a small ray of sunlight from the cracked window warmed her skin. Without thinking, she smiled just a little. A soft upward curve of her lips, a flicker of joy like a candle's stubborn flame in a storm. That was all it took. Mama Duru had been watching from the stairs, her hawk eyes never missing a beat. "What did I say about that cursed smile?" she thundered, descending like a storm cloud. Luma tried to turn her face, but it was too late. The slap echoed through the corridor like the crack of thunder before the downpour. The other servants, thin, hunched girls in torn head wraps and dust-covered feet, paused their sweeping and polishing. Then one by one they began to giggle. Not cruelly, not even joyfully, just the kind of laugh that grows in a place where fear has fermented for too long, bubbling into something ugly. Their laughter bounced off the stone walls and wrapped around Luma like a mocking shawl. She lowered her head, placing her palm gently on her burning cheek, but when she turned away, a small secret smile still lingered at the corners of her mouth. Mama Duru didn't notice. Or perhaps she did, and it scared her more than it angered her. That night, Luma cleaned the soot from the main hearth, scrubbing until her arms ached. When she finally climbed the attic ladder to rest beside her straw mat, the mirror greeted her from the darkened corner like an old friend. She glanced at it, tempted to lift the heavy velvet cloth again, to look into its silver depths. But she didn't, not yet. She only touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "They laughed." That night the house did not sleep. It began with a sound. A long drawn-out giggle that echoed faintly through the empty corridors. It wasn't loud, and at first the other girls thought it was a mouse or the wind. But then it came again, sharper this time, layered. Not one voice but many. And all of them sounded oddly familiar. One girl, Adina, the loudest laugher of the morning, sat up in bed when she heard the giggling come from the hall. She tiptoed out, lantern in hand, and wandered toward the attic stairs, drawn by a flickering shimmer. She paused outside the door. The giggling was louder now, high-pitched like the giggle of a child imitating grown-ups. It shouldn't have scared her, but it did. She felt something, some memory, pulling at her. When she opened the attic door, she saw the mirror. The cloth was off. Adina stepped forward, mouth parting. In the glass she saw her own face, but something was wrong. Her cheeks were hollow. Her mouth was stretched into a grin that looked like pain. Her eyes were wet, as if she had just been crying. As she stared, her reflection began to move on its own, lifting its hand to point straight at her heart. Adina screamed. The others woke up, rushed to the attic, found her shivering beside the mirror with blood on her lip where she had bitten down on her scream. She said nothing about what she saw. Just pointed at the mirror and shook her head. That night, she covered every reflective surface she could find, spoons, water bowls, even the sheen of polished wood. But the mirror had awakened. Over the next few days, every girl who had laughed at Luma began to hear things. Whispers when they passed mirrors, laughter when there was no one else around. The kitchen mirror fogged up with breath, even when the room was cold. Reflections stayed a second too long after the person walked away. A girl swore her reflection blinked twice when she didn't. Another refused to drink from her cup because she saw her face frown back at her. Luma said nothing. She still smiled. But now her smile had a knowing edge. Mama Duru grew uneasy. She forbade anyone from going near the attic. She said the mirror would be covered forever, sealed with chains if need be. But chains did not stop the hauntings. At night, the house would tremble slightly, just enough to make the floorboards creak. One morning, a long crack was found running from the base of the mirror's wall all the way down to the main hall. And on that day when Luma walked through the corridor, no one mocked her. The same lips that had laughed at her now trembled in silence. The mirror had turned the house into a listener of laughter. Every giggle had been caught, twisted, and played back with weight. Every mockery mirrored. Every slap remembered. That evening, as Luma fetched water from the courtyard, she paused at a small basin. The water shimmered, and in it she saw her own face. But behind hers, another smile hovered, a tender, protective smile. A woman's smile. Her mother's. Luma nodded, her smile steady. They had laughed as she was slapped. But the mirror remembered, and it would never forget. The attic air grew thicker with every visit, as if the mirror drank from the breath of those who dared approach. Luma tiptoed through the shadows after everyone slept, holding her silence like a sacred spell. The veil she once lifted in hesitation now rested folded neatly beside the frame, no longer a barrier between her and the impossible. The mirror welcomed her with a subtle warmth, despite the chill that filled the attic. It no longer showed her just her own face. Sometimes a flicker, There, in the corners of another, a woman's eyes. A smile not born of this house. The mirror began to whisper. The voice was like wind across a cracked window pane, soft but persistent. It didn't speak plainly. It offered riddles, fragments of stories, truths wrapped in mystery. "What is the gift that grows when buried beneath bruises?" it asked one night. Luma stared, her reflection overlaid with a woman's silhouette, one who wore her smile like it had bloomed there 1,000 times before. "You look like her," the mirror said once, the words appearing more in her mind than ears. "The one who smiled in storms. The one who danced in the rain. Your mother." Luma gasped. "My mother?" The mirror responded with another riddle. "A smile once buried can bloom as curse or gift. The choice is in the roots, not the bloom." The next night she brought a candle, setting it beside the base. The flame flickered strangely in the mirror, casting shadows that moved slower than her own. In the glass she saw Mama Duru, not as she was now but younger, radiant even. Laughing. Not the cruel, stone-faced woman who ran the household with an iron silence. She leaned in. She smiled. The mirror rippled like water touched by wind. Once, before the walls were built, before her joy was stolen, Luma stared, unable to look away. The next vision was fleeting, a child cradled close. A lullaby hummed through the air, not in words but warmth. That child had her mother's nose. Luma's nose. Her chest tightened. "She was happy?" Luma whispered. "For a time. Before silence was safer." The mirror never spoke of what stole Mama Duru's smile. It gave no names, only feelings. A clenched fist. A locked room. A scream swallowed in darkness. But in these fragments, Luma saw something terrifying. Mama Duru had not always been this way. Pain had sculpted her into a statue of cruelty. But Luma's mother, her smile lived in the mirror still. And then came the warnings. "She watches," the mirror said one night. "She fears your smile because it remembers her own. Will she try to take it from me? She already has. Each slap is a chisel at your joy. But you are not stone. You are seed." The words rooted in her heart. In the days that followed, Luma began to observe more. She watched Mama Duru's expressionless face as she issued cruel orders. But in quiet moments, at the basin by the window, there were flashes of something else. A muscle twitch near the lips. A far-off gaze toward nothing. Perhaps remembering. The other servants still mocked her, still whispered about the cursed mirror and the witch girl, who smiled too much. But Luma no longer flinched. The mirror had shown her what they could not see. One night, the mirror presented a final vision. Mama Duru, older, alone in a room of broken glass. Each shard reflected a smile that was not hers. She tried to gather them, cut her hands, bled, wept. And then, she vanished, swallowed by the sound of her own unspoken name. The voice of the mirror echoed once more, "Choose what you will plant, revenge or redemption. Both bloom. Only one feeds the soil." Luma stepped back, heart pounding. Her smile no longer felt like rebellion. It felt like inheritance. A living gift passed from mother to daughter, hidden in sorrow, waiting to be found again. She whispered back to the mirror, "Then I choose joy. Even if it hurts." The mirror shimmered in approval. For the first time, the woman's face in the reflection smiled with her, perfectly aligned. Outside the wind picked up. But in the attic, it was still and sacred, as Luma lit another candle. The glow stretched her reflection across the walls, and the whispers faded into quiet, content watching. The girl who smiled too much was no longer just a servant in a joyless house. She was the keeper of a secret. The smile that history had tried to bury had found light once more. Luma stood quietly in front of the mirror, heart racing. The attic was cold, but she barely felt it now. Before her, the surface of the glass shimmered, not with her own reflection, but with the face of another. Mama Duru, much younger, softer, radiant with unburdened joy. Her eyes danced with laughter, her smile wide and proud. Around her the old house looked different too. Mirrors hung on every wall, catching sunlight and casting light like confetti. There were ribbons in her hair. Music spilled from instruments. The house had once known joy. The vision changed, folding in on itself like a page being turned. Luma saw the young Mama Duru walking hand in hand with a tall man whose smile matched hers. They danced in the main hall, twirling under beams of sun. But soon, other images bled through. A letter clutched in Mama Duru's hand. A broken mirror. Whispers exchanged in corners. The man vanishing from the doorway. The smile fading from her face like breath on glass. Then came the betrayal. Luma didn't know the details, but she felt it in her bones. The collapse of trust, the shame Mama Duru couldn't bear, the walls closing in. Luma watched the older woman scream in front of a mirror, smashing it with a silver hairbrush. She cursed the house, cursed the light, and most of all, cursed her own face. One by one, the mirrors were turned to the wall or covered in cloth. The music stopped. The joy was banished. And Mama Duru became the iron woman she was now. The mirror whispered again, the voice calm yet firm. She buried her joy but never silenced it. It waits behind every reflection. You see it now, don't you? Luma blinked. She did. Beneath every cruel gesture, every punishment, every slap, it was there. A frightened shadow of the woman who had once believed in beauty. Mama Duru's tyranny wasn't just power. It was fear. Fear of what might return if someone smiled too brightly. Fear that her own walls would crack. Luma stepped back, heart heavy and alive with revelation. Her smile had power, not because it mocked pain but because it survived it. Her joy wasn't defiance, it was a mirror of memory. Mama Duru's silence hadn't broken the past, it had only locked it away. The next day the household was quiet again, but Luma's steps were lighter. She cleaned in silence, but the corners of her mouth curled softly as she passed covered frames and dust-drenched glass. The other servants watched her warily. They had all heard stories of what happened to those who smiled too long. That evening Luma returned to the mirror. This time it didn't shimmer or ripple. It simply opened like a door in her mind. She found herself walking through memories again, but they weren't just Mama Duru's, they were her mother's. A different woman now. One with kind eyes and that same familiar grin. Luma didn't know if it was a spirit, a vision, or just magic conjured by longing, but the warmth was real. You come from light, the voice said. Never forget, joy is not weakness. It's memory that refuses to die. The mirror showed Luma, smiling while scrubbing the floors. Her eyes sparkled. Her reflection stretched past her, leaving glowing footprints. It was then she understood. Her happiness could break curses, not just for herself but for others too. But she also saw Mama Duru again, older, sitting alone in a dusty room, staring at a covered mirror with longing she would never admit. Her face didn't show anger this time. Just sadness. A woman who missed who she used to be. Luma placed a hand on the mirror's edge. Can I help her? The voice answered, soft as a breeze, if she chooses to see herself. And that was it. Power didn't lie in forcing smiles or tearing down the cruel. It lay in offering the chance to look again, to remember. Downstairs, Mama Duru barked orders, her voice like snapped branches. But that night, as the moon crept across the roof, Luma left a single polished mirror at her door. No notes. No curses. Just reflection. Then she returned to the attic. The mirror welcomed her back, showing ripples of possible futures. Some darker, some full of light. In each, her smile echoed, through walls, through years, through pain. She now understood why her joy threatened Mama Duru. It wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. Mama Duru's footsteps creaked across the floorboards as she climbed the attic stairs. Her eyes, bloodshot from sleepless nights, darted wildly with suspicion. She clutched a heavy iron hammer in both hands, its weight matching the rage building in her chest. The house had grown strange, too strange. Smiles appeared where none should. Servants whispered about moving shadows and echoing laughter that didn't belong to any living mouth. Joy, once buried, was sprouting like weeds through cracks in her discipline. And at the heart of it all was that cursed mirror. She reached the attic door and flung it open. The dust danced in the moonlight, and in the center stood the veiled mirror, silent and tall like a waiting ghost. For weeks it had watched her. She could feel it. When she passed by the attic stairs, her heart pounded with the certainty that someone, was peering from behind the glass. Tonight she would end it. And the madness. And the smiling. With clenched teeth she stepped forward and ripped away the veil. The surface of the mirror shimmered for a moment, and then it was still. Her own reflection stared back, older, harsher, drained of the beauty she once flaunted. Wrinkles etched by bitterness lined her face. The cruel tilt of her lips, once charming, now looked like cracked porcelain. She lifted the hammer. The attic seemed to hold its breath. But before she could swing, the mirror pulsed. Not visibly. Not like a tremble or a flash. It pulsed deep, like a drumbeat she felt in her bones. Then the surface rippled. Her reflection split, giving way to a parade of faces, dozens, maybe hundreds. All of them women, girls, young and old, each one staring directly at her. Then she recognized them. One by one. The maid she had locked in the storeroom for a spilled tray. The servant girl who was banished for laughing during morning chores. Her own sister, whose tears had once soaked this very attic floor. Her own mother, glaring, shaking her head in disappointment. The faces came faster. Some crying. Some angry. Some smiling. Too many smiles. The hammer slipped from Mama Duru's fingers and clattered to the floor. "No," she whispered. "This isn't real." But the faces didn't leave. They stayed, filling the mirror like a wall of ghosts. And then, just behind them, Luma stepped into view, glowing faintly, not in body but in reflection. Her eyes were wide with calm, and her lips curled into a gentle, knowing smile. That smile. Mama Duru stumbled backward. "You don't know what you're playing with, girl?" She didn't realize Luma had entered the room until she heard her footsteps behind her. Luma walked softly, arms at her sides, her expression peaceful. She paused beside the mirror and faced Mama Duru. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She smiled. The mirror exploded in light, silver and gold and soft pinks that spilled across the attic like dawn rising through stained glass. Mama Duru screamed, shielding her face, but the light passed through her hands. It wasn't fire. It wasn't heat. It was something else. Something heavier. Memories. She felt them surge back into her. The laughter of her sister by the river. The taste of guava stolen from the market as a child. The first boy who called her beautiful. The day her smile faded for the last time, after betrayal struck deeper than bone. Her knees buckled. She sobbed. Behind her, Luma stood unmoving. But in the mirror she was still smiling, surrounded now by others who smiled too. The mirror, though cracked, did not shatter. It held firm, holding the weight of pain and beauty and everything in between. Mama Duru looked up through her tears. "What have you done?" Luma knelt beside her. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "You buried your joy." The mirror only remembered it. For a long moment they sat in silence. The attic no longer felt cold. The air carried the scent of old wood and something faintly floral, like blooming things long forgotten. The cracked mirror flickered with a soft warmth. The house was changing. The walls had watched too much. They knew too much. The cruelty that had kept them standing now trembled in the presence of something stronger. A smile. Downstairs a servant laughed. Another one followed and then another. The house echoed, not with screams but with wonder. Something had shifted and it couldn't be undone. Mama Duru, trembling and small, looked into Luma's face one more time. How are you still smiling?" Luma took her hand gently and whispered, "Because someone needs to remember how." And the mirror, now glowing with soft gold, pulsed again, not in warning but in welcome. The nights offered no peace. In her room, Mama Duru tossed beneath her thick wool blankets, sweat beading her forehead as that smile returned again and again, wide, soft, glowing with defiance. She saw it when she closed her eyes and when she blinked them open, etched on the walls, etched into the wood of her vanity, reflected in the candle flame. The servants whispered now, not in fear of her wrath but in wonder, about the girl who smiled too much, and the strange beauty that returned to the house since her laughter began echoing. Some claimed Luma's smile had a soul of its own, and others said the attic mirror was a gateway. But one thing was certain. Mama Duru's grip was weakening. Each day the house brightened. Sunlight seemed to linger longer in the halls. The once muted walls now shimmered faintly, especially when Luma passed by. Her smile had become infectious. Girls who had once laughed at her behind cruel hands now giggled freely at her side. Joy no longer hid in corners, it marched openly, bold and fierce, just like the girl who birthed it. Mama Duru, in contrast, wilted. Her face, once taut and commanding, had sagged under the weight of fear. She rarely ventured beyond her chambers now, and when she did, she flinched at every reflective surface. She ordered the water buckets emptied, the windows smudged, the silverware dulled. Yet still the smile came. It curled at her from the reflection in a spoon. It flickered in the hearth flames when she warmed her hands. It even glimmered in her tea, staring back at her, daring her to look away. One evening she screamed. The house froze. She had caught it in the mirror again, her own reflection no longer hers, but Luma's smile stretching unnaturally across her face. Her voice broke, hoarse from disuse, and she locked herself away completely, boards nailed across the door, cloth stuffed into the cracks. But it was no use. The mirror didn't need glass anymore. It had found other ways. Luma, for her part, never gloated. She walked softly through the house, calm and kind, her hands gentle, her smile quiet but steady. Some said she never spoke above a whisper now, for the mirror did the speaking. It told truths, echoed laughter, hummed lullabies from a time when Mama Duru, too, had danced barefoot and laughed without shame. The smile began appearing in the dreams of others too, not as a curse but a comfort. One servant dreamed of her mother's embrace, another of a long-lost friend. Some even claimed that in their dreams, the mirror had whispered secrets they needed to hear. Forgiveness, courage, love. But not Mama Duru. To her the smile was a torment. Each night it grew sharper, wider. It called her name in the voice of her mother. Then her sister. Then the lover who had betrayed her. Then finally, herself. One night, she woke up screaming and ran straight to the attic. The boards had cracked open somehow, as if the mirror had been waiting. She stood before it, wild-eyed, trembling, and stared into her own reflection. But it wasn't her face staring back. It was Luma's. Or rather, someone older. Softer. Sadder. You once smiled too, the voice said, not from behind the glass but from within her chest. Mama Duru staggered back. Don't you remember? The mirror whispered. She saw herself, young, radiant, spinning in a circle of mirrors, music echoing through the room. But then came the shattering. The betrayal. The hurt. The vow she made, never again would she smile, never again would she let joy in, for joy was a lie, a weakness, a crack in the armor. Who were you before the curse? Luma's voice echoed faintly. Tears welled up in Mama Duru's eyes. The smile in the mirror faded into a soft line, a knowing curve. Let go, the mirror urged. Or be consumed. But Mama Duru could not speak. She could only run. The following morning she was gone. No one saw her leave. Her room was empty, bed untouched, clothes still folded. Only a single item was missing, a small silver hand mirror cracked down the center. Luma was the first to walk into Mama Duru's room. She stood silently, the other girls behind her. A hush swept through them, not of fear but of transformation. The house exhaled. In the days that followed, joy bloomed like a rebellion. The attic mirror remained, but now it reflected more than one face. When two girls stood before it, it mirrored their best selves. It healed old wounds with quiet reminders and soft smiles. It reminded the household that joy was resistance and a smile, once mocked, was now the strongest kind of magic. Luma became more than a servant. She became a guardian of the house. She taught others how to smile, not out of politeness or obedience but out of power. Real power, the kind that restored warmth to broken homes and turned curses into stories of strength. They no longer slapped her for smiling. They followed her. And wherever she walked, the mirrors glowed. The day Mama Duru vanished, the wind outside changed. The house no longer creaked with dread. The walls, once damp with silence, seemed to breathe. The servants whispered about it, how the attic mirror had pulsed with light, how Mama Duru had screamed once, long and low, and then, nothing. Just her shadow burned faintly into the wooden floor like the echo of a memory. Her body was never found. Only the hollow of her presence remained. Luma stood quietly in the center of the house that morning, her hands still smudged with ash from the kitchen fire. Around her, the servants who once flinched when Mama Duru passed now gathered like moths to the flame of something new. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The quiet held a different kind of power now, one of curiosity, not control. She walked up to the attic, barefoot, her steps steady. The mirror awaited her. It no longer hummed with shadows or whispered riddles. It shimmered with warmth, and in its surface, Luma saw only herself, but not the child who once flinched at every shout or slap. This Luma stood tall. Her eyes still wide but no longer with fear. Her smile was calm, grounded, like roots reaching deep into the earth. That was the day the house began to change. At first the change was small. A new softness in the morning light through the windows. The scent of stew simmering longer, laughter returning to the kitchen. The servants stopped sleeping in the cold storage room and moved to the beds that had been left locked for years. They found old dresses and trunks and wore them again, not because they needed to impress anyone but because it reminded them of color, of self. Luma didn't declare herself mistress. She didn't need to. The house had chosen her. The rooms opened to her touch, the floorboards grew quiet beneath her steps, and the mirror never showed her anything but herself, smiling. Soon she began placing mirrors throughout the house. Not to trap ghosts but to free them. One by one they went into the hallway, the kitchen, the guest room, and even the courtyard. They weren't fancy, some chipped at the corners or cracked faintly. But when people passed they could see themselves, truly. And that, somehow, was enough to start the healing. The young girls who had once mocked her now followed her lead. One by one they smiled back at their reflections, hesitant at first. Smiling was no longer forbidden. It was a form of power. A way to reclaim something taken. Stories of the house spread across the village. They said the cursed mirror had changed. That the girl who once smiled too much now taught others to smile too. Some came with offerings, candles, fruit, fabrics. Others came with questions. Mothers brought daughters. Old men brought memories. And all left lighter than they came. One day an old woman arrived. Her hair was gray like storm clouds, her back curved with grief. She brought nothing but a small glass shard wrapped in cloth. "This," she said to Luma, "once belonged to my mother's vanity. I haven't looked at myself in years. I forgot how." Luma guided her to the attic. The woman stood before the mirror, trembling. And then, just for a second, she smiled. Tears followed. Not sorrowful ones, but those that come when a heavy fog finally lifts. That evening the woman left the shard behind. "Add it," she whispered, "to the house." And so it became a ritual. Every visitor who found their smile again left behind something reflective. A shard, a coin, a polished stone. Luma placed them all in a frame around the attic mirror. The once feared object was now surrounded by gifts of joy. But not all spirits welcomed the change. Sometimes the mirror pulsed faintly at night, remembering the pain it had once held. Once, a servant girl saw her reflection frown back at her. She screamed. Luma came running. She didn't scold. Instead, she placed her hand on the mirror and whispered, "Not all smiles are easy. Some take time." The mirror quieted. Another day, a boy who had lost his mother stared into the courtyard mirror and asked it, "Why did she leave me?" The wind stirred, and though no voice replied, he sat there for hours as if listening to a silence that held meaning. The house did not promise healing. It only offered the space for it to begin. Years passed. Luma grew older, but her smile never faded. Children born into the household were told stories of Mama Duru, not as a monster but as a warning. She was a woman who forgot how to smile, they'd say. And she tried to make everyone else forget too. In her place, Luma became the quiet flame that lit every corner. She taught girls to read their reflections not for beauty but for truth. She reminded boys that gentleness was strength. She painted the attic ceiling with the faces of those who had smiled in that room. Over time there were hundreds. No one dared remove the mirror. It had become a shrine, not of worship but of memory. If you stood before it and truly smiled, it glowed faintly as if approving. One evening many years after Mama Duru's disappearance, a young girl named Fina crept into the attic. She had heard the stories and wanted to see for herself. Luma found her there, standing before the mirror, quiet. "I don't know how to smile," the girl whispered. "Not really." Luma sat beside her. "Then don't force it," she said. "Smiles come back when they're ready." Fina looked at her. "Why do you still smile after everything?" Luma thought for a long moment. "Because," she said gently, "when I was small it was all I had. And now it's all I need." Fina stared into the mirror. Her lips twitched, hesitated, then curved just slightly. The mirror caught it and glowed. And somewhere in the quiet beyond the glass, a voice long buried whispered, "Asterisk, a smile once buried can bloom as curse or gift." Asterisk. That night the house felt full. Not just of people but of something deeper. Echoes of laughter. Fragments of songs. The warmth of 1,000 small joys layered upon one another. Mama Duru was never seen again. Some say she was swallowed by her own bitterness. Others believe she lives in the mirror still, watching, learning, remembering. But none of that mattered now. Because in the attic stood a mirror with only one reflection. A girl, smiling, forever unafraid.